Hope isn't dead. Okay? Now, even though it's going to sound like it might be, and even though I don't feel that good, and you know how guys are when we get sick, right? We think we're going to die. Not going to make it. Not going to make it. So I'm going to try to have hope today and live what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start this off the way that real life actually starts, right? Not the way some sermon usually starts. This isn't one of those, I woke up feeling inspired today. It's not one of those moments, okay? This is one of those moments where you realize something about yourself and you wish that you had noticed it, because once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. You know those moments. You're just living your life, right? Doing normal stuff. You're not committing any major crimes. You're not lighting anything on fire. You're just being you, right? And then all of a sudden it hits like, oh, that's not great. Yeah. And you ain't got an excuse for it. There's no defense for it. You just kind of sit there and you're like, wow, that's me. Now, for me, one of those moments happened in the most ridiculous way possible. So I'm doing what most of us do when we say that we're tired, which really just means that we don't want to deal with our own thoughts. I wasn't scrolling. I wasn't researching. I wasn't doing anything like that. Just thumb going up, thumb going down, and I realized something embarrassing. I wasn't looking for information. I wasn't even looking for entertainment. I was looking for distraction. I was looking for something to kind of numb that low-grade background feeling that says that something's off. I know you know that feeling. It ain't panic, right? It's not despair. It's that quiet sense of things just aren't the way they're supposed to be. And instead of dealing with it, grabbing whatever's closest, phone, food, Amazon card, another episode, another excuse. And the worst part is that when I do this, right, I don't deal with it. I do this. And when I do this, it works for about 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it works. And that's when it hit me. I don't think most of us are hopeless in the dramatic sense. We're not curled up in a little ball staring at the wall. We're not writing sad poetry in a dark room, right? We're functioning. We're paying bills. We're showing up. We're smiling at the right times. But a lot of us are living with what I'd like to call leaky hope. Okay. It's not gone. It's just constantly draining. And instead of fixing the leak, we keep trying to refill it with stuff that was never meant to hold it. Now, don't get defensive yet, because I'm talking about me, right? If you want to listen in, that's on you. But if you're honest, you already know what I'm talking about. Because hope is one of the words, we use it all the time, but we never really slow down to ask, what do we actually mean by it? We say things, I hope things get better, or I'm hoping things work out, or I hope next year's different, which sounds positive, right? But if you really listen to it, that ain't confidence. That's crossed fingers. That's optimism with anxiety baked in. That's wishing. It's not anchoring. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth that I didn't want to admit. A lot of what we call hope is just distraction with a positive attitude. It's not grounded. It's not stable. It's just us trying to stay afloat emotionally without actually dealing with what's underneath. That is the reason. That reason is why it matters. That's why real hope matters. Biblical hope. It's not the same thing as wishful thinking, right? The Bible does not use the word hope the way that we do. We use it like, man, I hope it don't rain. Scripture uses it like, this will hold when everything else collapses. And that's where Romans 5 kind of sneaks up on you, right? Paul says, we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And that sounds nice until you keep reading and realize what he ties to it. He doesn't say hope comes from comfort. He doesn't say hope comes from things going your way. He says suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character, and character produces hope, which is a wild thing to say if you think about it, because nobody signs up for suffering thinking, yeah, this is really going to strengthen my hope. I'm excited. I'm excited about this. Nobody does that. Suffering feels like the opposite of hope, right? It feels like the thing that kills it. But Paul is saying that hope doesn't grow in the absence of pressure. It grows because of it. And that's usually where we check out. because we want hope, but without the process. We want hope like we want fast food. We want it cheap, quick, no prep, no cost, no cleanup, nothing. We want hope to feel like motivation. Scripture treats hope like something far heavier than that, something forged, not imagined, something tested, not assumed. Let me put it this way. A lot of us don't actually want hope in as much as we want relief. We want the feeling to go away. We want the tension to stop. We want life to just freaking cooperate. But hope isn't the absence of tension. Hope is what lets you stand upright inside it. Those are very different things, right? Relief makes you feel better temporarily. Hope makes you steady permanently. That's why Hebrews says what it says. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. That verse doesn't hit unless you picture it correctly. An anchor is not decorative. It's not there for calm seas. An anchor only matters when things are pulling, waves, wind, drift. The anchor doesn't stop the storm. It stops you from being carried away by it. And that's the part that nobody likes, because an anchor means you're not going anywhere. You're staying put. You're riding it out. And most of us would rather do what? We'd rather just escape than endure it. So here's where I realized that I had been lying to myself. I thought that I had hope because I believed the right things. I could say the verses. I could explain the theology. But when pressure showed up, when uncertainty crept in, when life didn't really move on my timeline, my default response wasn't trust. It was distraction, which tells you something, right? You don't actually discover what your hope is in church. You discover it when you're tired, annoyed, disappointed, or scared. And when nobody's watching, that's when your real hope shows up, or it doesn't. And this is where Jeremiah steps into the room like he knows exactly what we're doing. Jeremiah writes, "Blessed is the man who trusts the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water and does not fear when heat comes." I love that line because it doesn't say heat won't come, does it? It says when it does come. Heat is already assumed. Pressure is expected. Difficulty is baked into the deal. The difference isn't the circumstances, it's the roots. Shallow roots panic, deep roots don't. And the scary part is you don't find out how deep your roots are until things get hot. Now, if I'm honest, which I am, some of my roots can be a little bit more shallow than I want them to be. Okay. I'll be honest with you, right? I had roots in routine, roots in productivity, roots in control, I've got this handled, right? And those things work great until they don't work great, until something breaks, until someone gets sick, until the future gets uncertain, until you realize how little control you actually have. Suddenly, ta-da! All those little fake roots, they start snapping one by one, and you're left scrambling for something solid. That's when you start to see why Peter actually says what he says in his letter. Set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Fully, not partially, not as a backup plan, fully. Which raises the uncomfortable question, if our hope is supposed to be fully set on Christ, what is it actually set on most of the time? I mean, when I look back at my life, if my hope is supposed to be set on Christ, what is it set on most of the time? Because whatever it is, that's the thing that determines how I'm going to react when things don't go my way. Probably the same with you. Now, here's where this gets kind of personal in a way that's a little annoying. Hope isn't just how you feel. It's about how you live in front of other people. Because whether you like it or not, your hope or lack of it is visible. People can hear it in your tone. They can see it in your reactions. They can feel it in how you respond to stress, disagreement, uncertainty. That's why Peter also says, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is in you. Not the hope that you talk about, the hope that is in you. The one that shows up when? Correct. Under pressure. And here's the convincing part that I had to sit with. If someone watched my life closely, would they even ask that question? Would they look at the way that I handle frustration, disappointment, fear, and think, man, there is something different there with that cat? Like, that dude has got it together. Or would they just see a slightly more religious version of the same coping mechanisms basically that everyone else uses? Because hope that never shows up in real life is just a concept. It's not a witness. And this is where salvation quietly sits underneath everything we're talking about. Because real hope doesn't come from trying harder or thinking better thoughts. Real hope comes from knowing where you stand with God. It comes from knowing that your biggest problem has already been dealt with, that sin has been paid for, that death has been defeated, that your future is secure, not because you performed well, but because Christ performed well. You see what I'm saying? That's why Scripture ties hope so tightly to the resurrection. No resurrection, no hope. Optimism, but optimism folds the second things get real. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. Think about that. This is Paul saying this. He's literally telling you Christianity has nothing if there's no resurrection. If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. It's worthless. That's blunt. He doesn't soften it, right? He doesn't say, hey, it's still meaningful. He says it's pointless. But then he flips it and says Christ has been raised, which means hope isn't a personality trait. It's a consequence. If Jesus walked out of the grave, then despair doesn't get the final word. Fear doesn't get the final word. Death doesn't get the final word. And that changes how you live now, not just how you feel later. So here's the quiet question that I had to ask myself, and maybe you do too. Am I living like that's actually true? Or am I just agreeing with it intellectually while functioning like everything depends on me? Because those are two very different things. One produces peace, the other produces exhaustion. One of the reasons hope is so slippery for us is because we confuse it with that. We confuse it with movement, that exhaustion. It's like we confuse it with movement. We assume that if something is happening, if there's progress, if there's change, then hope must be alive. But a lot of movement is just noise. You know it, and I know it. A lot of activity that we do is just us avoiding stuff like I talked about in the beginning. We stay busy because stillness forces us to confront what we actually trust. Waiting has a way of exposing what we've tied our security to. And most of us don't like what shows up when things slow down. That's why Scripture keeps talking about waiting in ways that sound completely and totally unreasonable to modern people. We don't get it, right? Flip, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll. It doesn't make any sense to us. Isaiah says, those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength, not they who hustle, not they who optimize, not they who figure it all out, they who wait. Which sounds passive until you realize that waiting on God is one of the hardest things that you could do because it means you're not allowed to fake momentum. You can't scroll your way through it. You can't distract yourself out of it. You either trust Him or you do not. That's it, period. And this is where hope becomes visible, not as a feeling, but as a posture. Hope shows up in how you wait when nothing is changing. It shows up in how you talk when you don't have the answers yet. It shows up in whether you panic, posture, or pray when the future feels unclear. And here's the uncomfortable part of that. People are watching that more than they're listening to anything you say. Let me say that one more time. People are watching that, the way that you act, the uncomfortable part. They're watching that more about you than they're listening to anything that you say. That's why Paul says what he says in Romans 15, that the God of hope fills you with all joy and peace in believing. Not joy because things are easy. Peace in believing, meaning hope grows as trust deepens, not as circumstances improve, which is kind of backwards from how most of us operate. We tell ourselves, I'll relax once this works out, or I'll have peace once I know what's next. When Scripture says peace is not the reward for clarity. It's the byproduct of trust. And this is where I had to admit something really wasn't flattering at all. A lot of my stress wasn't coming from my situation. It was coming on my insistence. It's coming from my insistence, rather, that, well, basically on knowing how it was going to turn out. I needed to know how it was going to turn out. Once I figured that out, I'm not going to be stressed. I'll be fine, right? I didn't need hope to survive hardship. I needed control to feel safe. And when control slips, hope gets tested. It's not a character flaw. It's a diagnostic tool. It tells you what you've been leaning on. Think about Abraham for a second. God promises him what? Descendants. Descendants. He doesn't even have a child yet. And then what happens? Years pass. And then what happens? Nothing. The promise doesn't change. The waiting does. And scripture says, in hope, he believed against hope. That phrase matters. Against hope. Against the visible evidence that he saw. Against logic. Against timelines. Abraham didn't have optimism. He had trust anchored in who God was, not what was happening. And that's the kind of hope that actually holds. Here's why that matters for us. Hope that only exists when things make sense. That ain't hope. That's not hope at all. It's preference. Real hope shows up when your circumstances argue against it and you still choose to trust. And that trust shapes how you live in front of other people, because people don't need you to explain hope. They need to see what it looks like when life doesn't cooperate. That's what they need to see. That's why Jesus' resurrection sits at the center of all this. Hope is not a mindset. It's a response to a historical reality. That tomb was empty. Death did not win. Sin did not have the final word, which means no matter how messy things get here, this is not the end of the story. And if that's true, then despair becomes irrational. Even when pain is real, pain doesn't disappear, but it's irrational. It doesn't get to define you. And this is where salvation quietly anchors everything again, because hope doesn't start with you fixing your life. It starts with God securing your future. If your standing with God is settled, right, then uncertainty doesn't have the same leverage over you. Fear still shows up, but it doesn't run the house. Anxiety still knocks, but it doesn't get the keys. And that changes how you witness. Whether you mean to or not, it changes the way you witness. See, hope isn't something you feel your way into. It's something you live your way into. You don't wait to feel hopeful and then act. You act in trust and hope follows. You choose faith when it's inconvenient. You choose obedience when it's uncomfortable. You choose patience when everything in you wants control. And over time, hope stops leaking because it's no longer being propped up by things that can't hold it. So let me leave you with this. Not as a command, not as a checklist, but it's just something to sit with, okay? Where are you demanding certainty before you're willing to trust? Where are you numbing? Scroll. Where are you numbing instead of waiting? Where are you saying you believe the right things, but living like everything depends on you? Now, you don't need to answer that out loud. You don't need to fix it tonight. Just be honest about it. Because hope doesn't start with pretending you're strong. It starts with admitting where you're not. But the good news, now watch this. The good news, the kind that actually holds weight, is that Christ didn't save you so you could white knuckle your way through life. He saved you so you can live anchored, steady, and free, even when things are unresolved. That ain't naive hope. That's resurrection hope. See, hope is not dead. Sit with that. Let it bother you a little, and then let it change you.